Alright, welcome to TLDR. We're doing the Lunar Chronicles Book 2, Scarlet. Alright, so recap from last time. Right, Cinder is in prison. Dr. Airline shows up, gives her a new arm, new leg, and he's like, alright, you gotta get the fuck out of Dodge. You gotta go to Africa. We'll meet up. We'll lock in. Alright, so in this book, our story begins not with Cinder, but with a French woman named Scarlet. And she is pissed. Alright, she's pissed because her grandmother has been missing for 2 weeks, right? And the police decided to drop her case. And Scarlet is a little suspicious of her disappearance. The reason they dropped the case is because, you know, it seems like she left of her own volition, and they just assume she left and committed suicide or something like that. But there's a couple of things that Cinder discovers that refute this point. Number one, her grandmother wouldn't just commit suicide. You know, she's a strong, independent, old woman. Right, she wouldn't do that. Number two, it was her birthday. She's been gone for 2 weeks and she missed Scarlet's birthday, right? Number three, she bought Scarlet a bunch of ingredients to make Scarlet's favorite cake, but then she just never made it because she went missing. Number four, Scarlet finds her ID chip. You remember last book we talked about how everybody has these ID chips that are basically your whole identity, and you believe it or not, you can track people with these ID chips. And mysteriously, her grandmother's ID chip was just left on the counter when she went missing. So she's a little suspicious, and she's pissed that the police dropped the case. But anyway, even if her grandmother is gone, they do work on a farm, like that's their job. So she has to make those deliveries. So that's what she's doing right now at the moment, as she's fuming over this like current state of events. All right, and as she's making a delivery to a tavern, which is like a regular customer, one of her friends that works at the tavern, she's like, "Oh, hey Scarlet," and she basically tells Scarlet about this street fighter that's been coming in for the past few days that she's been fawning over. She's like, "Oh yeah, this cute little shy street fighter guy," and yeah, she basically just tells her about him. All right, as Scarlet's making this delivery, she's tasked with delivering some food to one of the patrons at the tavern, which she does, and coincidentally, it is the street fighter that Emily, her friend, was talking about earlier, right? And they get to talking a little bit, and she asks him like, "Oh, why don't you eat the tomatoes?" Because he has like a bunch of food, but he just has tomatoes that he picked out of the food. So he tries them and he actually likes them. All right, it's not really plot significant, but it's significant for their story progression. All right, so just you don't have to remember the tomatoes, but it's there. It's a feature. But anyway, she also notices as she's talking that he has a tattoo on his arm that is like LS and then a couple of letters after that, which is going to be important later on, so pay attention to that. And then, as they're conversing, their conversation is cut short when Cinder notices that a bunch of the patrons of the bar are watching a news broadcast of, believe it or not, Cinder, because she is actually like broadcast as a lunar fugitive that was trying to assassinate Queen Labana and all this crazy shit that got blown out of proportion, right? And so the bar patrons are making fun of her because she's lunar and everybody hates lunars and all that shit. And Scarlet, surprisingly, seeing as Cinder is a teenager who's going to be executed eventually, she defends Cinder, right? And the patrons don't like that. They call her and her grandmother crazy, and Scarlet has a lot of pride. She doesn't take no nonsense for anyone, right? So obviously her natural response is to punch this guy in the face, right? And as they're getting into the scuffle, Wolf steps in to defend her, right? And in doing so, right, because he like basically holds this guy up by his like choking him, holding him up. So obviously he gets kicked out of the bar. All right, so anyway, I gotta lock in. All right, Scarlet, she finishes the delivery, right, and she finds the street fighter nearby, right, and the street fighter apologizes and says that he stepped in because he didn't want Scarlet to pull her gun out. By the way, Scarlet is strapped, right? She carries around a pistol that her grandmother gave her. That's gonna be important later on. Just remember, she's always strapped. She has that gun. She has that thing on her. All right. Anyway, you know, he apologizes. He's like, oh, I didn't want to see you have to use the gun. And he also asks her, like, do you have any more tomatoes? Because remember, he actually tried the tomatoes and he actually liked them, so now he has a thing for tomatoes. And, you know, she gives him some and some carrots. He's like, I introduced you vegetables, because apparently that's not in his diet. He also asks her, like, do you need a farmhand? Because he's looking for work, because he doesn't want to really do street fighting. So he's like, oh, do you need a farmhand? And obviously she turns him down, because remember, she's still looking for her grandmother and she can't afford any of these distractions. Another thing to note, he also reveals that his name is Wolf. Yeah, a little on the nose, but by the way, I forgot to mention the theme of this book, because every fucking book has a fairy tale theme. This one is the story of Little Red Riding Hood and the fucking wolf. Just letting you know. Meanwhile, back in New Beijing, we're introduced to another character called Carswell Thorne. Now, personality-wise, Carswell Thorne is like, think of think of Peter Quill, but with like more riz. So, you know, he's chilling, he's in prison, right? And suddenly Cinder drops from the ceiling in front of him, and, you know, being the ladies' man that he is, he decides to introduce himself. And Cinder is immediately annoyed with him, right? And he, you know, seeing as she is trying to escape, he's like, hey, maybe we should, you know, team up so we could escape this prison, right? And she is not a fan of the idea until he mentions, like, you know, I got a spaceship, right? We can take that spaceship, we can just dip, right? So she's like, oh, okay, fine, you can come with me, right? And, you know, he just keeps talking, and Cinder's getting more and more annoyed. And then suddenly Carswell experiences he's like a little under the influence, because now he sees Cinder as like this beautiful goddess that he has to obey, right? And Cinder tells him to shut up. So then he proceeds to sit on his cot and just be silent. And what we witness here is Cinder accidentally using her glamour on Thorne to make him be quiet. Much like in book 1 when Kai first sees Queen Lovanna for like the first time in the flesh, and he's immediately like smitten with her for a split second before, you know, he snaps out of it. Back in France, you know, Scarlet's beating herself up about being distracted by Wolf and the whole incident at the tavern, so she flies back to the farm, and scarily, is that a word, scarily? Mysteriously, she finds that the lights to her farmhouse are on, and, you know, she goes in to investigate, and she finds her grandmother's room a complete mess, and surprisingly, her deadbeat dad is there. Now, this character's not really important. Like, he only shows up he's only mentioned a couple of times, but he is relevant to the plot, so just remember him. But anyway, Scarlet hasn't seen her dad in a while. She doesn't live with her because he's a deadbeat, which is why she lives with the grandmother, and he mysteriously just shows up to her house and starts fucking destroying Scarlet's grandmother's room, right? And when Scarlet asks him, like, what's going on, he goes into this whole tirade about like needing to find it, or that her grandmother's gone and she's not coming back. And, you know, as she tries to kick her deadbeat dad out of the house, she discovers that he has these like circular burn marks on his arm, and they're like placed in perfect rows and everything like that. And interestingly, her ID chip, much like her grandmother's, is missing from his wrist. When she asks him, like, who did this to you, he gives vague answers, like they made him, saying that they asked questions that he didn't know the answers to, and that her grandmother was asked the same questions but she refused to answer them. And she asked him, like, what did they make you do? And he answers, like, they made me burn myself. Like, those are what the burn marks are. Like, he was forced to do those himself, right? And the only like bit of information that he can remember is that his torturers had these letters and numbers tattooed on their arms, much like the Street Fighter Wolf's tattoo, right? And Scarlet, you know, in her fit of rage at discovering this, decides to pay Wolf a visit. Meanwhile, back in New Beijing, we learn a little bit more about Carswell Thorne, such as his crimes of military desertion, international theft, attempted theft, handling of stolen goods, and theft of government property, the government property being a whole spaceship. We also learned that he's wanted in Australia and America, where he's expected to be put on trial and imprisoned as well after he serves his time in New Beijing. Anyway, Cinder releases her control on Thorn because, you know, she feels bad. She doesn't want to use her lunar gift. She's disgusted by it. Like, she's scared she's going to turn into Queen Levana and shit like that. So she releases him, right? And as they're escaping, they hit a little snag where they have to mind control some guards begrudgingly, and they escape into the sewers. Meanwhile, you know, Emperor Kai, well, he was Prince Kai, but now he's Emperor Kai. He's having this inner conflict about Cinder, not because she's a cyborg, but because she's a lunar, and that he has no idea if his feelings for Cinder were actually genuine or if they were just her using her mind control powers on him, which obviously they weren't, but he has no idea. He can't trust her, but he still has feelings for her, right? And he finds out that Cinder escaped from prison, and the dilemma being that Cinder is her bargaining chip. Remember, in the last book, Levana was like, oh, choose this girl or your kingdom, right? And he chose his kingdom, his subjects, because he doesn't want to see all of these people get hurt. So he is forced to send military forces to track her down, and all the while he's hoping that they don't find her because he actually still has feelings for her. Meanwhile, back in France, Scarlet makes her trip to the farmhouse where all these street fights are supposed to take place, and she calls the police beforehand, so they're on the way. When she finds Wolf, she demands him, like, to tell her where her grandmother is, and obviously he's like a reigning champ in the ring, and it's his turn to go up to fight, and she literally, like, she does this right here. She's like, where's my grandmother, bitch? She demands, like, oh, I know that you have the same tattoo as the people who kidnapped my grandmother. I know you kidnapped her. I know you kidnapped my father, and you better tell me where they are, or, you know, I'm gonna shoot you, right? And he says, like, he didn't kidnap them, but he knows where they might be, and he elaborates that he has an alibi, that he's been at the street fights the past few, like, 2 weeks, which is the amount of time that her grandmother's been kidnapped, and that he's been at the tavern the mornings. And so he says, like, he might know where they are, but then he enters the ring afterwards to fight Hunter, who is, like, undefeated in the street fighting. So anyway, you know, they get to fighting, and Wolf kicks his ass, and there's a thing where, like, if you win, you're supposed to kill your opponent, basically, like, winner takes all, right? So he's getting positioned to snap Hunter's neck. Hunter's not important, by the way, that's just his name. But anyway, he gets ready to snap Hunter's neck, and Scarlet's like, ah, shit, he's fucking crazy, and Wolf sees, like, the fear in her eyes, and he's like, ah, shit, I'm a little out of control, right? He realizes the error of his ways, and he decides to fucking get the fuck out of Dodge. He literally, like, he runs into the fields, like, he just dips, right? And Scarlet, you know, she's like, oh shit, I guess I'll go find him another day, because the cops are coming, and she has to get out of there as well. Alright, meanwhile, Thorn and Cinder are sneaking through the sewers to freedom. By the way, the way they describe their escape through the sewers is absolutely fucking disgusting. Like, they're barefoot, there's fucking, like, they're fucking literally, like, in the sludge, just fucking trekking through it. Like, it's fucking disgusting the way they describe it. But anyway, they eventually make it to the warehouse where Thorn is keeping his ship, and it's stored and in this warehouse, and the owner of the building, who was paid to keep the ship safe, he's like, I don't know if I should give you this ship. You guys are wanted criminals. She's a lunar fugitive. I don't know if I should, man. And Lunar's like, she fucking uses her lunar persuasion. She's like, fucking, it would be so awesome. It would be so cool, right? And they make their way into the warehouse because she can control his mind. And then the authorities arrive. So eventually they make it to the ship, but they can't activate the autopilot, and the power cell is, like, damn near drained. So Cinder attempts to start the ship herself, and she becomes unconscious because she, like, plugs into, like, she fucking does, like, a cyberpunk moment where she fucking jacks into the ship, but it leaves her unconscious. And it's kind of funny because she has to be fucking recharged like an android, because when she jacked in, the ship, like, drained her fucking systems. Meanwhile, in France, Scarlet's making breakfast the next day. This is after the street fight, incident, right? And the man himself, Wolf, shows up in her front yard, and Cinder responds with a shotgun leveled at his forehead, and he's like, hey, chill. I didn't kidnap your grandma, but I might know who did it. So, you know, begrudgingly and cautiously, she lets him inside, and he explains, like, he didn't kidnap his grandmother, but he might know who did, because the tattoo on his arm actually represents his participation in a gang called the Wolves. And he explains that he resents his time in that gang and that he's no longer with them, but that he ran away from the gang. And he theorizes that the motive for her grandmother's kidnapping might be because she was a former military, and he thinks like the grandmother might know some military secrets or something, and that's why they kidnapped her, to like figure out what she knows, like might give them an advantage or something like that. And you know, Scarlet finally having a lead, she's like, all right, let's go. And he warns her that like it's very dangerous, and she doesn't give a fuck. But as they're debating going after the gang, Scarlet hears the sound of somebody trying to flee, and she decides to investigate. As Scarlet's investigating, she runs out of her house to find that her deadbeat dad is back, and he's turning her hanger upside down, looking for something. He also breaks Scarlet's hover car window, and with a little help from Wolf, they restrain her dad and find out that he was actually wearing a wire the entire time, and that he's been feeding the wolves information. He admits that he knew about the wire as well, and that he was exchanged freedom for finding something that was never even specified to him. He just needs to find it. He doesn't know what it is, but that's why he's there looking, right? And you know, Scarlet is obviously pissed at him, and she's like, how can you do this? And he talks about how she knew something, and she refused to say what it was as they tortured him for information. And naturally, Scarlet kicks her deadbeat dad out of the house, and Wolf offers to help her, right? And he's like, oh, I think I know where your grandmother is, you know, she's in Paris. Meanwhile, Kai is discussing with his royal advisor Torin and a chairman that they're having difficulty finding Cinder. They also learn that Dr. Erlon was a lunar and that he helped Cinder escape. And somehow, the one moment that, you know, Kai has his like office fucking wide open, not secure, Levana storms in, right? And this is important for later. But she storms in and, you know, accuses Kai of helping Cinder escape, and because she found like the perfect moment to storm in when his room wasn't guarded at all, Kai suspects that Levana is spying on him, and this is touched on later in the book, so pay attention. Levana announces, you know, if you don't find her, and I'm leaving for Luna, right? If you don't find her, I'm sending my own forces. They'll go find her myself, and you don't want me to fucking step in and find him, basically. Meanwhile, in space, you know, as they were taking off from the warehouse, they realized like, oh, the auto control system for the ship is damaged, and Cinder has the bright idea to take the personality chip from her friend Aiko, who was destroyed in the last book. Remember, the android who got dismantled and all that. She takes her personality chip and puts it into the ship's control system, and obviously it works, and her and Aiko catch up on the current like few weeks of events. Alright, meanwhile, Scarlet and Wolf take a lift to the train station, and when they get on the train on their way to Paris, Scarlet and Wolf, they have a bonding moment, right? And Wolf talks about how in the past he fought so well because in the gang the weak were picked on, so he decided like, I don't want to get picked on in this gang, so he just got really good at kicking ass, basically. And Scarlet's like, oh, I'm gonna go get some food. You want to join me? And he's like, nah, I'm good. So she goes and gets food by herself, and she meets this weird man who calls himself Ran. And one detail about him is he has like razor sharp fingernails, which is, it's not really important, but it's like a describing detail. Remember this moment though, like the whole moment, because it's gonna be mentioned later in the story. But anyway, she returns to the room wary of this suspicious ass dude, right? And then suddenly the train goes on lockdown, and it's kind of funny because like when she gets back, Wolf is like, "You fucking stink," right? And he's like, "Who are you with in the fucking cafe car, right?" but you know, the interrogation gets cut off because a Medroid comes in asking for an ID scan and a blood test from both of them, and they come to the conclusion that the train has had a leishmaniasis outbreak, and they decide to jump off to escape the whole train getting quarantined. Because, you know, if you learned anything from chapter 1 in the first book, like, if a quarantine is going down, you gotta get the fuck out of Dodge, because they're just gonna hold you there. They decide to jump off the train to escape the quarantine, and they fucking dip. Meanwhile, in space, Thorn and Cinder take inventory of the ship, and they learn, like, ah shit, our power cell is like nearly drained, so we gotta land soon. But the problem is, like, as soon as they land, they're gonna be detected and fucking arrested on site. So Cinder tries to figure out how, like, all the Lunars sneak their ships onto Earth, because in the last book they were talking about it, like, lunar refugees land on Earth all the time undetected. So she's trying to figure out, like, oh, maybe it's something with my lunar gift, so maybe we'll be able to land like the Lunars land, right? And when they're deciding, like, where they're going to go, when they land, Cinder decides, oh yeah, let's go to Europe, because if you remember, I don't know if I mentioned it in the last video, but there is a moment where Cinder fixes the Kai's android, right? And then the android immediately starts talking about this old lady called Michelle Benoit, who was an ex-military pilot, right? And Cinder comes to the conclusion, like, oh shit, she must know something about my past as the, you know, the lost princess and all that shit. Also, she decides two things. She decides she's not going to tell anyone that she is the lost princess, and she also decides, like, when it comes to using her lunar gift, she doesn't want to end up like Queen Levana. So she decides, like, I'm gonna use it as sparingly as possible. Like, if I can get through this whole ordeal without using it at all, that would be a good thing. So she's trying to use her gift as sparingly as possible because she doesn't want to become like Levana, basically. Meanwhile, back in France, Wolf and Scarlet are hiking through the forest, and Wolf reveals that his plan is to basically catch a ride on a passing train by jumping on it, and she asks him, like, they have a little bonding moment while they're hiking, and she's like, hey, who do you think will win in a fight between you and a pack of wolves? And surprisingly, he's like, nah, I'd win, right? And she notices that when he smiles, he has, like, these sharp canines, and when she points it out, he's like, oh, it was a thing when in the gang, right? She just assumes, like, oh, he has those implants because the gang is wolf themed, so they made him, like, have canine implants, basically, right? And they decide to go to a lake while they're hiking because, you know, they want to rest and eat and drink water. And working together, they kill a duck that they're, like, cooking up to eat, right? And they bond over the fire. And then, surprisingly, out of nowhere, Ran from the train, the dude with the sharp fingernails, he shows up, right? And after a few tense moments, it's like that scene from Shrek, right? Where fucking, like, Fiona's dad and Shrek are just, like, glaring at each other from across the table, all pissed and shit, right? That's basically Wolf and the dude, Ran. It's just a really tense moment, right? Scarlet demands, like, the man, cause she, like, locks in, she figures out something, and she's like, alright, roll up your sleeve right now, right? And she finds that he has a tattoo like Wolf's and like the people who tortured his father and possibly her grandmother, right? And Ren reveals that him and Wolf are brothers, and that Wolf is a high-ranking member of the gang. He also reveals that he's been sent to retrieve Wolf, but Wolf is like, nah, I'm not coming back. Get fucked, right? So they get into a fight, naturally, and since Wolf is so good at kicking that ass, right, he's on the verge of strangling Ran and drowning him in the lake and killing him, right? And Scarlet's like, ah, shit, I can't let Wolf kill this dude, he might have information, right? And she's like, hey, it's like that one meme where Batman's, like, kicking this fucking burglar's ass, right? And she's like, hey, I think you got him, right? And he just ignores her, like, he's intent on fucking killing Ran. So to stop him from killing her, she pulls out the Glock, right? And she shoots him in the shoulder to stop him from killing Ran. To be fair, she did give a warning shot before, but he straight up ignored it, so she had to, like, graze his shoulder. And, you know, since they can't get any information out of him, and since he is unconscious from damn near getting strangled to death, They just decide to leave him and they move on with their plan to catch a train. As they wait for the train, they eventually get to the point where they're supposed to jump on the train. And as they're waiting for it to come, Scarlet, she turns into Sherlock Holmes basically, and she's like, "Hold on, you were a highly ranked member of your little gang. Wouldn't you have like fucking information and shit?" Like, she basically figures out that Wolf lied to her about being in the gang, and that her grandma was kidnapped. And he admits to Scarlet, and she's like, "You better explain yourself." He explains, right, that like if he did tell the truth, she wouldn't believe her. And he explains that he left the gang the morning that Scarlet's grandma was taken, and he regrets that he did nothing to stop the gang, despite his high rank and fighting abilities. He also admits that the ultimate goal of kidnapping his grandma was to find Princess Celine, and he believes like Scarlet's grandma has the information that they need, and that her grandma has been to Luna, because he goes on to explain, right, that her grandma took a trip to Luna, and it was actually 9 months after that trip that Scarlet's father was born, and people in the gang speculate that she had a fling with a doctor named Logan Tanner, who was lunar and who actually killed himself. I believe this was mentioned in the first book, but there's this guy named Logan Tanner who was the doctor who killed himself in an asylum. It was suicide by bioelectricity or something like that. But yeah. Anyway, Scarlet appreciates his honesty, and after getting a little angry, she forgives him for the lies, and they jump on the passing train. Since I'm giving you like a summary, I can't go over like every instance of them bonding with each other, but Scarlet and Wolf have been getting very close, and as they're chilling on the train, they fucking, they Meanwhile, Cinder's trying to use their lunar powers to conceal their ship so they can land without being detected. And in important detail, she finds it very suspicious that they haven't been found out yet. But before she can get to the bottom of that, she sees that the news feeds are talking about Cinder herself, and Emperor Kai, he's like holding a press conference about it. And when they ask him, like, "Oh, well, did you know that fucking Cinder was a cyborg when you invited her to the ball?" And he, being the based man that he is like, I don't see how that's relevant, because remember, everybody hates cyborgs, but he's W dude. He just doesn't give a fuck. Thorn also does some sleuthing, and he figures out Michelle Benoit, Scarlet's grandmother, had a granddaughter with no hospital records, which is Scarlet. She has no hospital records. And Thorn suggests because he doesn't know that Cinder's actually the lost princess. So it's like, oh, maybe Scarlet is actually Princess Celine, since she has no hospital records, and fucking almost nobody is ever born outside of a hospital. She must be lunar, which means she must be Princess Celine. That's the conclusion he comes up with. Meanwhile, Scarlet has a flashback dream about her being 13, and basically she was supposed to visit her father for a month. But, her father's such a piece of shit that she couldn't stand it, and she came home a day early. Or not a day early. She came home, the very next day. And her grandmother is, really angry about it. And she sent her out to do chores and shit, and she comes back, right? And Scarlet overhears a conversation in which her grandmother and a man are talking about a girl who's going to be sent away after living with Michelle, and Scarlet assumes, oh man, they must be talking about me, right? But some context clues, like the fact that he reveals that he's married to a woman with the last name Lynn, like Lynn Cinder and Lynn Audrey, right? By the way, the woman they're talking about is Lynn, which means that this person is Garen, who was Cinder's stepfather, who died of leishmaniasis, which is mentioned in the first book. Which means that the girl that they're talking about giving to Garen is Cinder. Meaning that Michelle Benoit and Scarlet's grandmother are the same person, for those of you who didn't make the connection. And Scarlet tells Wolf about his memory, and she thinks if she tells the gang about this like flashback that she had that her grandmother will be set free. But instead, Wolf is like, "Ah, shit! No, you gotta please. We gotta stop looking for her. We can run away together. You don't have to do this, right?" He's really scared for some reason all of a sudden, right? And Scarlet isn't backing down. She wants to trade her life for her grandma's because she loves her grandma that much. And since Wolf tells her that they're most likely going to capture her for this information, she just decides like, oh, I'll trade my life for my grandmother's. Like maybe if I tell them something, they'll set my grandmother's free. Anyway, they finally arrive in Paris. And when they arrive at the gang's like base of operations, Scarlet receives a comm that her father died and the cause of death was alcohol poisoning. But Wolf basically implies like, ah, shit, I think, call me crazy, I don't think he died of alcohol poisoning, which he implies like he was murdered by the gang. But anyway, when they're in the base, they encounter lunar thaumateurs, which are like these underlings of Queen Lavanna who are like really good at controlling people's minds. Like their lunar gifts are very advanced, right? So at that same moment, they encounter the thaumateurs, and the Wolf reveals that he's been lying to Scarlet the whole time, which that's crazy. It's kind of wow. Who would have thought Wolf was lying the whole time? He's literally been lying the whole time. Anyway, he's been playing Scarlet, right? And that he also reveals that the gang that he's in isn't a gang, but it's like a lunar army, basically. And she's captured and in prison before she can see her grandma. Who would have saw that twist coming, right? Literally, the theme is like the big bad wolf, right? Anyway, meanwhile, Kai's sitting in his office when Lynn Audrey, this fucking bitch, right? She shows up and she's like, "Oh, I got some information, right?" And she reveals that she figured out that Cinder was there when Peony died in the quarantine. Because if you remember from the first book, Cinder showed up to Peony in the quarantine on her deathbed because she was trying to give Peony the antidote, but she was too late and Peony died, right? She also reveals that Cinder might have been the person that gave Sunto the antidote, because after that moment, like when Cinder in the first book she gave Sunto the antidote, he was like the miracle child, basically. He was all over the news because he's like literally the only person who's ever recovered from letumosis, basically. But anyway, Audrey also, fucking bitch ass super sleuth, right? She figures out like, oh, Cinder must have took Peony's ID chip because I fucking didn't receive it. So, now Kai has a lead on where to find Cinder, basically. Meanwhile, in Paris, Scarlet lays in her prison cell when a guard takes her to finally see her grandmother. In the book, right? Because since Scarlet's French, she doesn't say grandma, she says grand-mère, right? And when I look at my notes, it just says grand-mère, which I think is pretty funny. I don't know. I just like how she said grand-mère instead of grandma. I just think it's funny. Anyway, we're getting off track, right? They take her to see grandma, and when she actually sees her grandma, she tells her about the dream that she had about the basically how it was a flashback and how Princess Aline was given to Garen and all that shit, right? And the grandma says like, oh, they're not gonna let me go because they figured out that I can't be mind controlled. By the way, Michelle Benoit can't be mind controlled, and they're trying to figure out why, because there's a theme in these books of like, if you can't be controlled, you have to be destroyed. It's like what was that one book, 1984, where they want like complete and utter control of everything. Like if they can't mind control you, you might as well be dead. That's why they kill the shells. That's why they want her grandma, even though she doesn't have any information, right? And the grandma basically says like, oh, they're not gonna let you go either because since we're related, they're gonna try to figure out like, oh shit, is this lack of mind control biological or not, right? Another thing Scarlet notices, right, because her grandma is a farmer, right? So she has like calloused hands, but for some reason, her grandma's hands are soft, and unintentionally, uncharacteristically, she calls Scarlet like weak, which she would never do. And you know, since the theme of the whole book is like the big bad wolf, and she's like, my grandmother, you know, she's acting a little weird, you know, she has fucking big teeth or some shit like that, you know. It's like the old fairy tale. Oh, gee, grandma, what a big nose you have. Anyway, you know, plot twist, fucking her grandma isn't real. It was a lunar trick, and her grandmother was actually Ran in disguise. They imply that they could get her grandmother to talk if she sees Scarlet being tortured. So, you know, they're not going to let her go. Meanwhile, Wolf is being briefed about an attack that's planned tomorrow, which was ordered by Queen Lavanna because obviously they haven't found Cinder yet. And Wolf has been elected to be the one to lead that attack. However, Wolf is still worried about Scarlet, and his obligation to the Lunars prevented him from acting, right? He wanted to help Scarlet, but he couldn't, or else he'd be fucking prosecuted and shit like that. Meanwhile, Thorn and Cinder finally land in Europe, and they actually land on Scarlet's farm, but you know, she's not there, and her grandma isn't there, and her father's dead, so the farm is completely deserted, and they decide to investigate, right? And they examine the hangar, and Cinder is like has a fucking hit of deja vu. She's like, wait a minute, I've been here before. And she finds a secret bunker in the hangar, right? And inside she finds like medical items, you know, mechanical items, and 2 blank net screens, right? And a suspended animation tank, which is basically a tank designed to keep someone alive but unconscious for a long time. And she suspects like, oh, this is where she became cyborg, right? And on those net screens, right, they figure out like, oh, Michelle Benoit can't be mind controlled because she has the same device that Cinder has that prevents her from being mind controlled and prevents Lunars from using their gift. They also find like the way they describe it in the book is like this poor like 2-year-old baby who has like these horrendous burn wounds, right? Like they describe it as like a fucking horror scene, which I imagine it was. But anyway, she realizes like as mentioned in the first book, she has no memories of her life before the car accident that killed her parents. And the reason for that is not because of the car accident, but because she was in this suspended animation tank, basically. So she can't remember anything because she didn't have any memories because she was unconscious the whole time. They decide like, oh, let's go pay a visit to Michelle Benoit, right? So they show up, they go in the farmhouse, right? And they find that the house is unlocked, and all they find inside is obviously a messy house and Benoit's ID chip. Just as they're about to leave, they find this little girl who immediately faints upon seeing them because they're fugitives, right? And she's like a scared little girl. But anyways, Cinder and Thorn argue about what they're going to do with her, and they eventually decide like, we can interrogate her and figure out where Michelle Benoit is, right? And you know, Thorn, using his W Riz, he's like, all right, just calm down. We just need some answers. And you know, he gets her to calm down, but he can't find out anything about Michelle Benoit. And Cinder decides to, you know, use her little lunar persuasion, right? And she makes the girl confess, but she doesn't really know anything. The only thing they figure out is like where they can find a repair shop so they can get another power cell for the ship. Meanwhile, in Paris, Scarlet lies there in prison, you know, and surprisingly, she's visited by Wolf himself, and you know, understandably, Scarlet's pissed with him because you know she was betrayed, and he's the reason you know she's captured in the first place. And Wolf wants to apologize, but he can't because there's a guard standing right outside of his cell. And instead of apologizing, he gives her a little kiss on the mouth, and he slips something into her mouth. Not that. All right. He basically when they're kissing, he fucking like slips an ID chip into her mouth that's supposed to unlock the cell door, and the reason he does it with a kiss is because he's trying to be covert so that the other guards don't know about it. And he also gives her a warning to wait until morning because the night won't be safe to come out. Like, it won't be safe tonight to come out, so just wait till the morning. Meanwhile, Cinder and Thorn make their way into the repair shop, and while in the shop, they find a strange man who seemingly taunts Cinder. Like, he like takes off a glove, because remember, Cinder always wears gloves because she has that cyborg hand that she's trying to hide. And the guy in the shop like takes off a glove, looking right at her, and he winks at her, right? And you know, she ignores it. It's like, oh, it must be a coincidence, right? And they learn that they've been discovered, so they duck into a bar to evade the police, but they get cornered in the bar by 3 officers, okay? And one of the officers spots her and is like, are you Lynn Peony? Which is her dead stepsister, basically, the one she has an ID chip of. And all the while, right, she's like using her lunar trick to go unnoticed, like, the whole time. Because the reason her and Thorn haven't been discovered yet is because she's been using her lunar trick to disguise themselves, basically. But when they bring up like Lynn Peony, her dead stepsister, the like trauma of that incident, like the sadness of that incident, like interrupts her ability to properly use her gift, right? And they're surrounded by the cops, basically. Thorn and one of the officers they wrestle to the floor, basically, and an officer demands her to put her hand up. So that's 2 officers that are occupied. And, you know, Thorn obviously loses the fight with the cops, and he's subdued and put in handcuffs, and Cinder locks in, and she's like, all right, let's do this one last time. And she uses her lunar trick to stop the officers. But suddenly, that strange man from the repair shop, he collapses on the floor, and then he collapses on the floor in pain, and he like rises up all feral and shit, right? The man lunges for Cinder, saying like, oh, the queen has been looking for you. And he fucking jumps at her and tries to attack her, but the officer steps in the way. Which there's this scene in book 1 where Cinder tries to shoot Queen Levana at the ball, right? And she uses her lunar trick to make one of the guards take the bullet for her, and this is basically what happens. This is basically what Cinder does in this moment, but she doesn't mean to do it on purpose, which is an important part of her character development, right? So the officer is forced to step in the way, right? And the officer dies, and she's tossed aside, so that's 1 officer down, so that means there's 2 officers left, right? And as Cinder's like fucking reeling from seeing this officer get fucking mauled right in front of her, Thorn is like, hey, you gotta snap out of it. You gotta help me get out of these handcuffs so we can get out of here, right? And as they're trying to make their escape, Cinder's grabbed by the crazy dude, and before she's torn apart by him, Thorn hits the dude with the chair, because she actually helped him get out of the handcuffs. And because he got hit with the chair, he frees Cinder and tries and bites Thorn on the shoulder, right? And then as he's about to finish off Cinder, she whips out her little like finger, her robot finger with the dart in it, and she finally fucking uses it, and she shoots the dude with a tranquilizer dart that knocks him unconscious, right? And she grabs Thorn and the power cell, and they get out of the bar. But what they see when they get out is just pure fucking carnage, like an absolute bloodbath, because not only are there more of those crazy people outside, but they're just terrorizing the entire town. Cinder calms Aiko, right? And Aiko's like, dude, the police found us. They put a tracking device in the ship, right? So they get to the ship, and Thorn takes the tracker off the ship while Cinder abandons Peony's ID chip because she realizes, like, oh, this is how they tracked me. God damn it. I was such a fool. So she throws away the ID chip, and she also installs the power cell, and they escape by the skin of their teeth. And Cinder realizes that they have Benoit. The Lunars have Benoit, and Aiko reveals that these attacks are happening all over the world as well. Like, it's all over the news. Meanwhile, in Paris, Scarlet is alone in her cell, and she calls out and hears her grandmother. And she leaves her cell because this whole journey has been about her trying to find her grandmother. So she leaves the cell despite Wolf's warnings, and she finds her grandmother fucking weak and disheveled, because remember, she's been like tortured for 2 weeks. And she tells Scarlet that Princess Celine is alive and that she needs to find her, and that her name is probably Cinder. And their reunion is interrupted by Ran, who shows up and he's like, I'm gonna kill Wolf. Alright, I'm gonna kill Wolf, because in their hierarchy, right, the strongest is the alpha, the Sigma Wolf, right? So he's like, I'm gonna kill Wolf and become fucking Sigma, right? Then fucking Michelle Benoit just starts talking mad shit. Like, Scarlet's grandmother fucking does not hold back. She just starts roasting fucking Rand, calling him like no, you'll never be Sigma. You dog shit. You fucking skibbity Ohio. Anyway, fucking, she roasts the shit out of Rand, and Rand responds by fucking killing her. And while Rand is killing her, Scarlet is forced to run away. And, you know, she puts up a little bit of a fight. She fucking bricks Rand in the face with a piece of piping, right? And, you know, she continues to run, but eventually she gets caught by Rand, and right before Rand is about to fold her, fucking the nigga himself, fucking Wolf, just shows up and starts kicking his ass, right? And, you know, fucking, it's like that scene from Megamind where he's like, oh, thank you, you've saved the city, and fucking Wolf's like, I wouldn't say saved, more like under new management, right? Because he's like in this fucking stupor like all of the other soldiers that are on Earth, right? Just like the guy at the bar, like he's in this feral state, like a fucking Florida man hyped up on bath salts, right? So Scarlet has to get the fuck out of Dodge. Right? Anyway, she escapes to the street, right? And, you know, Wolf fucking tackles her and he's about to fucking rip her to shreds, and she tries to talk him out of it. And he's like, oh no, I can't, I'm literally being mind controlled because the thaumaturge is controlling him. Anyway, he can't resist the urge, right? And then suddenly he fucking collapses unconsciously. Is that a word? Unconsciously? He basically collapses unconscious. Because fucking Cinder and Thorn show up to save the day, and they ask Scarlet, like, where's Benoit, right? Because this whole book has been about fucking finding this grandma. But, you know, she's dead, and as they leave, Scarlet is like, alright, we can't leave my boy Wolf here, alright. So they grab Wolf, but, you know, the thing is, like, Wolf is fucking like twice the size of most of them. Like, he's a big dude, right? So it takes like Cinder and Thorn carrying him to get him to the ship, right? But before they even get to the ship, they're fucking surrounded on all sides by the bath salt fucking soldiers, right? And the thaumaturge shows up, and he tries to get Thorn to shoot Cinder using mind control, but Cinder tranquilizes him. So now you have Wolf unconscious and you have Thorn unconscious, right? And right before they're about to get fucking folded, Aiko, because she's in the ship, like she is the ship, right? She runs over some of the guards, and Cinder reaches for Thorn's gun, but she's unsuccessful. So Scarlet shoots the thaumaturge, right? And Cinder manages to mind control a soldier into loading her friends onto the ship. But it was way more difficult to control these like fucking soldiers. By the way, I need to mention this, right? For a lunar to mind control someone, it's fairly easy, but to control these soldiers, because they're like biologically engineered to be like killers, right? They're a lot harder to mind control. And, you know, Cinder's fairly new at this whole mind control thing. So as she's like mind controlling him to get everybody on the ship, she isn't able to hold it, right? And she loses control, and Scarlet fucking bricks the thaumaturge with a shotgun. But then Scarlet gets mind control, but Cinder fucking takes her gun, is like, no. She takes her shotgun, right? And they get on the ship before she can use it, and they take off with everyone in the ship, and the thaumaturge dies because, you know, he got shot with a shotgun, and now he's not able to control the thaumaturge just because he's weak, so they just rip him to shreds. While Kai is watching this carnage happening worldwide, fucking live on camera, And apparently they figure out, because he's attending a meeting with all the world leaders, and they figure out like these attacks are happening in 14 other largely populated cities. And they also figure out that aside from these largely populated cities, there's also a small town called Rieux in France, which is where fucking Scarlet and her grandmother were living, and where the Cinder was attacked by their first fucking cracked out soldier, right? Kai deduces that Lavanna knew about Cinder being in Rieux, right? Because of the discussion he had with Audrey about Peenie's chip. That's how they tracked it, right? So he deduces, like, I was the only one who knew about the chip, so I should have been the only one who knew where Cinder was, right? So his only conclusion is, oh, she must be spying on him. My room must be bugged, right? And not only his room, but the whole palace, he deduces. And he decides to call off the hunt for Cinder and track down the soldiers in his country, because, you know, they're wreaking havoc everywhere. He also realizes that he has to keep his people safe, so the only way he can do that is by agreeing to Lavanna's marriage alliance. Meanwhile, in space, they debate if Wolf is a threat to the crew, and Cinder uses her lie detector to determine him as, you know, a loyal person, and that, like, he's not gonna go feral and start hurting people again. They also watch a press conference where Kai announces his decision to marry Lavanna, and Scarlet and Cinder argue because Scarlet thinks Cinder's a coward because she's because Scarlet knows that she's Princess Celine, right? Because her grandmother told her, and she's like, you coward! All these people died because of you, because you haven't done anything to stop Lavanna, right? And as they're arguing, Thorne's just chilling in the background because they didn't really trust Wolf, so Thorne had the shotgun pointed at Wolf, and like as they're arguing, he's just chilling in the background, fucking pointed his shotgun at fucking Wolf. I just thought that part was funny. But anyway, during the debate, Thorne and Eiko learn that she's Princess Celine, and Wolf also explains that Cinder is a very strong lunar, right? And she's like, no, I'm not that strong. I only controlled one soldier. But obviously, as I explained earlier, controlling one of these biologically engineered soldiers is a lot harder than controlling like a regular person. Like he talks about, like, oh, it's like the ratio is like one lunar soldier is equivalent to mind controlling like 100 people, pretty much. Meanwhile, on the moon, Lavanna learns about Cinder's actions in Rio, and she's just sitting there fucking brooding like fucking the Joker. She's like, I'm gonna fucking take over the world and shit. But anyway. Meanwhile, back on the ship, you know, Scarlet's mourning the death of her grandmother, and she's like, you know, I've been crying for a long time. I should go get something to eat in the kitchen, right? And she finds fucking Wolf in there trying to open a can of tomatoes, right? Because he doesn't know how a can opener works, because he's just been like fucking roughing it out his entire life, basically, right? And as they make dinner, Wolf and Scarlet work out their issues with each other. Like, you know, Scarlet doesn't really trust him that much because he literally lied to her the whole time, but, you know, she still has feelings for him. And Wolf doesn't really think he's worthy of Scarlet, but he still has feelings for her. And, you know, he reveals like the reason that he betrayed her when they got to the base is because like he knew she wasn't gonna give up on her grandmother. So he's like, the only way of saving you was to convince them, like, oh, fucking, you don't have any information and to let you go. But the only way he could do that is if they think like, oh, he's still loyal to the pack. So that's why he betrayed her. But then everything after that he couldn't control because, you know, he's being mind controlled by the thaumaturge, right? And, you know, they have a very romantic moment, and, you know, they decide to stick together. And it's kind of funny. There's this moment where, because, you know, Aiko's like the entire ship, like she's the control system, so she hears everything, and she's like, Cinder, could I please just like, next time we land, can you like put me in a different robot or something? Because I'm getting sick and tired of being forced to eavesdrop in everybody's conversations, right? And, you know, her and Cinder are talking, and Cinder comes to the conclusion that she And Cinder basically knows what she's gonna do now. She's gonna train with Wolf. She's gonna train her mind powers and learn how to fight, right? And she's gonna talk to Dr. Erlon, and they're gonna see what they can do to beat Levana. And she's gonna go find the mystery girl from book 1 and make her tell Cinder everything she knows and stop Levana, basically. And with that, that is the end of Scarlet, book 2 in the Lunar Chronicles series. Yeah, I think this book is like my second favorite in the series because I just like the relationship between Wolf and Scarlet, and I like how they introduce Thorn. Like, honestly, I think Thorn is like my favorite character. Like, every scene he's in is pretty fucking funny. But yeah, I think I'm going to just finish this series, the Lunar Chronicles series, and then I'm going to do. I'm basically like, if nobody votes, like vote down in the comments. Jesus, vote down in the comments. Do you want me to work on? Because I'm thinking either I do Renegades, which is another book by the same author as this one, or Steelheart, or super powerds, which they're all about superheroes, by the way. Yeah, so I think that's my next course of action. Vote down in the comments, which one do you want to see? I think basically a recap of Renegades is like it's about superheroes versus supervillains, but it's from like the POV of the villain, right? Steelheart is the same thing, like all of the superheroes are evil, and it's just humans trying to kill the superhero. And then superpowers is like, it's like the same plot as My Hero, basically. But, you know, the character is actually cool. But anyway, vote down in the comments which one do you want me to see next. Because if you guys don't vote, I'm literally going to put all my options on like a spinning wheel and just see what I get. But anyway, you know, stay safe, drink some water, and I'll catch you in the next one. Goodbye.